The desert highway shimmered under the late afternoon sun, a lonely strip of cracked asphalt stretching between two endless horizons. Wind carried the scent of dust and gasoline, whispering through the dried sagebrush that framed the road. For miles, there was nothing. Until the silence broke with the distant rumble of engines. It began as a faint hum, but it grew, swelling into a thunderous roar that rolled like a storm over the sand. 20 motorcycles emerged from the horizon, their chrome glinting in the sunlight like blades. The women riding them wore matching black leather jackets emblazoned with a crimson phoenix. The emblem of the Iron Sirens, one of the most feared and respected all-female biker clubs in the Southwest. They rode in perfect formation, 2 columns slicing through the heat waves. Dust trailed behind them, and at the head of the pack rode a woman, whose presence commanded silence even among the roar of engine. Her name was Raven Steele, the Iron Sirens' leader. A woman whose legend stretched from Arizona to Texas. Her jet black hair was tied in a braid that whipped behind her helmet. And her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. She wasn't just a rider, she was a storm in human form. Up ahead, a pickup truck sat pulled over on the shoulder of the highway. Its hood was open, steam rising like a ghost into the heat. Next to it stood a man, broad-shouldered, in a faded Marine Corps t-shirt, wiping sweat from his brow as he stared at the engine. Beside him, a little girl about 6 years old clutched a small stuffed bear, her sun hat tilted awkwardly over her face. The Iron Sirens slowed. Engines grumbled as they surrounded the truck in a semicircle, dust swirling around their tires. Raven raised her hand, signaling the group to hold position. "Who's this?" one of the riders muttered through her helmet mic. "Don't know," another replied, "but he's on our stretch of road." White the man turned slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes met Raven's, steady, calm, unafraid. His jawline was rough with stubble, and his forearms bore faded tattoos from another life. "Everything all right, sir?" Raven called, her tone cool but not unfriendly. He gave a small nod. "Just overheated. Been driving too long in this heat. My little girl's thirsty, and the nearest town's 20 miles back." Raven's eyes flicked to the child. The girl peeked from behind her father's leg, shy but curious. Something in that gaze softened Raven's expression, just for a moment. "Name's Jack Carter," he said. "Marine veteran. Just trying to get us to California." That word, Marine, hung in the air like static. Several of the riders exchanged looks. The Iron Sirens had many stories about men, most of them bad. But something about this man's calm presence, the protective way he stood by his daughter, made the air different. Raven dismounted, boots crunching against gravel. She approached him slowly, helmet under her arm, the glint of authority in her every movement. "You picked a lonely road to break down on, Marine." Jack smiled faintly. "Didn't plan on it, but that's life. Plans change." He crouched beside the engine, trying again to adjust something, but his hands trembled from exhaustion. Raven noticed it, the kind of tremor that comes from too many sleepless nights. Her second in command, a fiery redhead named Blaze, leaned close and whispered, "Boss, we don't need to babysit some stranger. Let's ride." Raven didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the tattoo on Jack's arm, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. A scar ran through the design like lightning, old but deep. She froze, her breath caught. For a split second, the world tilted. That same tattoo. That same scar. Her mind flashed back. An image of a man lying in the dirt, blood staining his uniform, reaching up with trembling fingers. "Tell my brother I'm sorry," he had whispered as gunfire echoed in the distance. "Hell no, why?" Raven blinked hard, shaking the memory away, but her pulse quickened. She stared at Jack's tattoo again. "Where'd you serve?" she asked quietly. Jack straightened, meeting her gaze. "Afghanistan. 3rd Battalion 5th Marines, Sangin District." A Raven's face paled. The desert heat seemed to fade around her. "You were, with Echo Company." Jack hesitated. "Yeah. Lost too many good men there." The other bikers watched curiously as their leader stepped closer, her voice trembling in a way they'd never heard before. "Did you know a Corporal Daniel Steele?" Jack's eyes widened slightly. "Danny. Yeah, I knew him. He was my best friend." The rag slipped from Raven's hand. For the first time, her mask cracked. "He was my brother." Silence fell. Even the engine seemed to hum softer. Jack looked at her as if seeing a ghost. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "He saved my life. I tried to save him but..." Raven turned away sharply, swallowing hard. The sound of her boots shifting on gravel was the only thing between them and the weight of memory. For years, she had searched for answers. How her brother had really died, why no one had written, why the report didn't match the stories she'd heard. And now, standing before her, was the one man who might know the truth. But before she could speak, the little girl tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Daddy, I'm thirsty." Jack nodded, kneeling to hand her the last bottle of warm water. She took a small sip, her eyes drifting toward Raven. "Are you a soldier too?" Raven's lips twitched into something almost like a smile. "Something like that, kid." Blaze sighed. "Boss, what's the play? We helping this guy or what?" Raven turned back toward her riders, her jaw firming again. "Yeah," she said quietly. "We're helping him." The Iron Sirens exchanged surprised glances. No one questioned her, no one ever did, but they could feel something in her tone. Something personal. As the bikers moved to assist, Raven's gaze lingered on Jack Carter, the Marine who had carried her brother's last breath. She didn't know yet whether she wanted to thank him, or demand the truth that might break her all over again. The Iron Sirens had seen countless men stranded on the road before. Truckers. Even a few con artists pretending to be in trouble. But this one was different. There was a stillness about Jack Carter that didn't match his broad shoulders or the hard lines of his jaw. He didn't beg. Didn't boast. He simply kept working quietly on the engine, as if fixing it could keep his past from catching up. Raven watched him from a few feet away, her arms folded across her chest. The dry wind tugged at her braid, but she didn't move. Inside, her pulse was a drumbeat. Every time she looked at that tattoo, memories surged. The last time she saw Danny, standing on their front porch with a grin that hid his fear. He'd promised he'd come back. He never did. Now here was this Marine, this stranger, claiming to have known him. "Got any water left in your bikes?" Raven finally asked without taking her eyes off Jack. One of the riders, a tall woman nicknamed Diesel, pulled a canteen from her saddlebag. "Barely. But yeah." She tossed it over. Raven caught it one, handed and walked to the little girl. The child's eyes were curious but cautious. "Thank you," she said softly as Raven knelt down and handed her the bottle. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she whispered, clutching her stuffed bear tighter. Raven smiled faintly. "Pretty name. You hang tight, okay? We'll get you and your dad back on the road soon." Jack glanced over, his expression unreadable. "Appreciate it. Didn't think a biker gang would stop for a guy like me." "We're not a gang," Raven corrected coolly. "We're a club. A family." He nodded once, respectful. "Then thank your family for me." The Blaze rolled her eyes behind them. "This is wasting daylight, boss. We've got to meet in Ridgepoint before dark." Raven didn't respond immediately. Her mind was spinning, not about the schedule, but about the past she'd locked away for too long. "You can go ahead if you want," she said finally. "I'll catch up." That silenced everyone. Raven never split from the pack. "Boss, you serious?" Blaze asked. Raven's gaze remained fixed on Jack. "Dead serious." The women exchanged uncertain glances. The desert heat seemed to press heavier on them now, thick with tension. Finally, Blaze revved her engine and motioned for the others. "All right, ladies. You heard her. Let's give our fearless leader some bonding time." The other riders smirked, but no one dared question the order. One by one, the engines roared back to life. The Iron Sirens peeled off the shoulder and rode away, dust clouds spiraling behind them, leaving Raven, Jack, and little Lily alone on the empty stretch of highway. As the sound of their bikes faded into the distance, silence fell again. Raven crouched beside the truck. "Mind if I take a look?" Jack stepped back. "Be my guest. I've tried everything short of prayer." She peered under the hood, scanning the hoses and connections. "Your coolant line's cracked. You'll never make it to California without a patch." Jack sighed. "Figures. Story of my life. Patching up what's already broken." She looked up at him sharply, her eyes narrowing slightly. "That's supposed to mean something." He gave a faint, tired smile. "You'd be surprised how much a man can lose before he learns not to expect miracles." Raven leaned against the truck. "So tell me, Marine. How'd you end up out here with a kid and a busted engine?" Jack hesitated, then wiped sweat from his brow. "I was stationed in Pendleton before the divorce. My ex couldn't handle the deployments, the PTSD, any of it. When she left, I took Lily and went east to start over. Now we're heading back west, closer to the VA hospital. Maybe find a place where we both belong." There was no bitterness in his voice, just exhaustion. The kind that seeps into a man's bones and never really leaves. Raven studied him quietly. "Danny talked about you," she said after a pause. He wrote once, said there was a guy in his unit who'd take a bullet for anyone. Said you reminded him of Dad. Jack froze. His throat tightened. He said that. She nodded, her voice low. He said you were the only one who made the sand feel less empty. For a moment, Jack looked away toward the horizon. The weight of those words seemed to settle on him. Your brother was a good man. The best I ever served with. His jaw clenched. He didn't deserve what happened. Raven's chest tightened. Then tell me what did happen. The report said he was hit in a crossfire. But that never sat right with me. Jack hesitated, his eyes shadowed by memories. Wasn't hit in a crossfire. He was covering us during an ambush. Took the hit so the rest of us could fall back. He knew it was suicide, but he did it anyway. The air between them thickened. Raven's breath hitched. You were there. I was right beside him. Jack's voice cracked slightly. He handed me his tags before he went out. Told me to find his sister if he didn't make it home. A Raven blinked hard, her voice breaking to a whisper. He said that. Yeah. Jack nodded. But after the medevac failed and we got pinned down, I lost his tags in the blast. I tried to write but... He stopped, looking away. Turns out, letters from the dead don't travel easy. Raven turned from him, blinking back tears she hadn't shed in years. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, golden and cruel. She'd spent so long burying her grief under asphalt and adrenaline. And now, standing beside the man who had witnessed her brother's last breath. The wound reopened like it had never healed. I hated you, she admitted quietly. Whoever you were. The guy who lived when he didn't. I told myself if I ever met you, I'd make you regret it. Jack's shoulders tensed. He didn't look at her, just stared at the horizon. You think I haven't regretted it every day since? Their silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. Lily sat in the truck, drawing circles on the dusty window with her finger, unaware of the storm unraveling outside. After a long moment, Raven exhaled. There's a service stop 15 miles north. I'll tell you there. Jack frowned. You don't have to. I'm not doing it for you. She interrupted. I'm doing it for him. She climbed onto her bike. The engine growling to life. Hook up your truck. Let's ride. As the sun began to dip below the mountains, Jack Carter fastened the tow chain to her Harley. Unaware that this ride would not only fix his broken truck, but unearth secrets that had been buried in the desert far too long. The highway turned gold as the sun melted behind the mountains. Heat waves shimmered off the asphalt like ghosts rising from the ground. And the sound of Raven's Harley rumbled steady and low, towing Jack's truck inch by inch toward the distant glimmer of civilization. Lily had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, her little hand still wrapped around her stuffed bear. Every bump in the road made her stir, but Jack kept one hand on the wheel, eyes fixed on the fading orange sky. Behind the exhaustion, something deeper brewed inside him. Unease, maybe guilt. He hadn't expected to ever see the sister of Daniel Steele. And now here she was. A woman of steel herself. Raven rode like she owned the road, fierce and silent, every movement sharp with purpose. Her hair streamed from beneath her helmet, the crimson phoenix on her jacket glowing faintly in the sunset. The radio in Jack's truck crackled to life for a moment, static giving way to a soft country song. He reached out, turned the volume down. The lyrics about loss and homecoming were too close, too sharp. Ahead, Raven signaled a right turn. The two vehicles rolled off the main highway and down a dirt path that led to a lonely service stop. A mechanic's shack, half collapsed, surrounded by rusting cars. A flickering neon sign buzzed weakly. Petisiso, Open Moisin Dully Fel Ikt. Raven parked her Harley near the front, dismounted and stretched her shoulders. Jack pulled the truck up behind her, engine sputtering. When he stepped out, dust swirled around his boots. You sure this place is open? He asked. Raven gave a dry smirk. Pete doesn't do schedules. But if there's beer in the fridge, he's around. As if on cue. The metal door creaked open and a burly man with a gray beard and oil-stained hands stepped out, squinting against the last light. Well, I'll be damned. If it ain't Raven Steele. Thought the sirens only rode through here when the moon was blue. Raven grinned faintly. Hey, old man. Got room to fix a busted coolant line? Pete scratched his head. For you. Always. He looked past her at Jack and Lily. You bringing strays now? Just one, she said, her voice quieter than usual. A Marine. Pete's gaze softened, he nodded. Then he's family enough. Jack gave a polite nod as Raven followed Pete inside to discuss repairs. He leaned against the truck, letting the night breeze cool his face. Crickets began their soft chorus. For the first time in days, the air didn't smell like heat and gasoline. It smelled like dust and home. He watched through the open garage door as Raven talked with Pete. Her voice was calm, but her movements were tight. Like a soldier trying not to show pain. When she stepped back outside, the twilight caught her face. The faint scar along her jaw glinted beneath the neon light. "Pete'll fix it," she said. "Might take a few hours though. You and Lily can crash in that office over there." Jack nodded. "Thanks." Raven hesitated. "You got food?" He shook his head. Without another word, she turned to her bike, opened the saddlebag, and pulled out a small pack. Protein bars, bottled water, a can of peaches. She handed them over. "Wes, you don't travel light," he said. "Experience teaches you what hunger feels like." She replied flatly. He accepted the food, then paused. "You know you don't have to help us this much." Raven looked at him for a long moment, the neon light reflecting in her eyes. "You carried my brother's name in the dirt. That earns you more than silence." Jack swallowed, unsure how to respond. He wanted to thank her, to tell her what Danny had meant to him. But every word he tried to form felt too small, too weak. Instead, he said, "He talked about you too. Said his sister was tougher than any man in the corps." A flicker of warmth crossed her expression, quickly buried. "He always exaggerated." Jack smiled faintly. "No, he didn't." For a few seconds, the two just stood there, caught between past and present. The hum of the highway, the faint sound of crickets. It all felt like the world holding its breath. Then Pete called from inside, "Need you for a minute, Raven." She turned toward the garage, but before she went, she said softly, "When I get back, you're gonna tell me everything. No lies, no filters. I've waited too long to know how my brother really died." Her tone wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in grief. Jack nodded slowly. "I'll tell you. But you might not like what you hear." Raven's eyes hardened. Truth rarely tastes sweet. She disappeared into the garage, the door creaking shut behind her. Jack leaned against the truck again, staring at the darkening sky. He thought about the firefight. The chaos, the screaming, the dust. He'd carried that memory like a weight for years. And now he'd have to open it, bleed it out for her. Inside the office, Lily stirred awake. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily. "Hey baby, you okay?" She nodded, rubbing her eyes. "That lady, she's nice. But sad." Jack looked toward the garage, where Raven's shadow moved under the dim light. "Yeah," he said softly. "She's got a reason to be." Lily yawned, curling up again. "She reminds me of you." That made him smile, bittersweet, wary. Maybe that's not a good thing. A few minutes later, the garage door rattled open again. Raven stepped out, wiping her hands. "Pete says we'll need a replacement hose. He's sending for one from the next town. Should be here by morning." Jack nodded. "Then I guess we're here for the night." She tilted her head slightly. "You scared of sleeping under the stars, Marine?" "Only if the stars start asking questions," he replied, half smiling. Raven smirked despite herself. "You've got some humor for a man running on fumes." "I learned it from your brother," Jack said quietly. "He used to crack jokes even when mortars were landing." Raven's smile faded. She looked away, toward the dark stretch of desert. He always did hate silence. For a moment, neither spoke. The desert wind swept between them, carrying a low, mournful hum that sounded almost like a voice lost to time. When Raven finally met his eyes again, her voice dropped to a whisper. "Tomorrow. You tell me everything, how he died, what he said. I don't care if it hurts. I just need to know." Jack nodded once. "Tomorrow." As the two settled into uneasy rest. The veteran haunted by guilt, the sister haunted by loss. The desert held its secrets close. But somewhere beyond the darkness, those secrets were beginning to stir, and by morning, neither of them would be the same. The desert night wrapped the world in silence. The stars hung low and endless, spilling silver light across the sand. Jack sat beside the truck, a small campfire flickering between him and Raven. The flames painted her face in soft gold, carving shadows beneath her eyes. She sat cross-legged, elbows resting on her knees, a bottle of water in one hand and her thoughts in the other. Lily slept inside the truck cab, wrapped in Jack's old Marine jacket. Every so often, she murmured in her sleep, clutching her bear closer. The night was peaceful, but it felt fragile, as if one wrong word might break it. Raven stared into the fire. "Funny," she said quietly. "I've ridden through this stretch 100 times and never stopped to look up." Guess I forgot the stars were still here. Jack poked the embers with a stick. That's what happens when you keep running. Her eyes flicked to him. You sound like a man who knows. I do. He gave a small, rueful smile. Been running ever since Sangin. Raven leaned forward, her tone sharpening. Then stopped running. Tell me? Jack hesitated. The fire cracked. His gaze dropped to the sand. You sure you want to hear this? I've waited 8 years. She said. I can handle the truth. He took a slow breath. We were stationed near the river. Routine patrol. Intel said the village was clear, but it wasn't. We walked straight into an ambush. Snipers on the ridge, mortars from the east. Danny got hit early, shoulder wound. He should have fallen back, but he didn't. He kept shouting orders, dragging the wounded behind cover. We lost half the squad before I could even get a signal through. Raven's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. Jack continued, his voice low and heavy. Then came the explosion. I don't even know where it came from, roadside ID maybe. It flipped our Humvee. Danny and I were thrown clear. He was bleeding bad. But he wouldn't stop fighting. Kept firing until the last clip. He paused, eyes glassy. When I told him we had to retreat, he looked at me and said, You go. Someone's got to get them out. Raven's breath trembled. Jack's next words cracked slightly. He pushed me toward the ridge, said he'd cover us. By the time I got the others to safety and circled back, he was gone. Just gone. I found his tags half buried in the sand the next morning. The fire popped. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Raven said, barely above a whisper, Hey, always had a hero complex. Jack nodded slowly. He saved 7 men that day. But he never stopped being your brother. His last words, he said, Tell Raven I kept my promise. Her head snapped up. Promise. Yeah. I didn't know what he meant. He was fading fast. But those were his last words before the shelling started again. A Raven swallowed hard, tears she refused to shed stinging her eyes. When we were kids. She murmured. I used to get into fights. He'd patch me up after every one, even when I didn't deserve it. Before he left for boot camp, he told me, no matter where I go, I'll always have your back. I guess that was his promise. The silence that followed was thick with shared ghosts. Jack stared into the fire, lost in memory. I carried his name on my arm for years. He said, tapping the tattoo. Didn't want to forget. But no matter what I did, it felt like I was living a life he earned. Not me. Raven looked at him, really looked. The weight in his voice wasn't pride, it was punishment. You think you should have died instead. He didn't deny it. Every day. The firelight flickered across his face, catching the deep lines of guilt that war had carved there. You're wrong, she said softly. Jack blinked, startled. If he'd seen you like this, haunted, hollow, he'd have punched you in the jaw and told you to live for him. That's what Marines do, isn't it? Carry the ones who didn't make it. But Jack let out a shaky breath. Maybe. But carrying him feels heavier than dying ever would have. Raven stared at the flames, her voice quieter now. You're not the only one carrying him. The words hung there, fragile and real. For years, she'd buried her grief beneath the roar of engines and the smell of burning rubber. But here, under the desert stars, the walls began to crumble. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small. A silver dog tag, worn and dented. I kept his spare, she said. He left it on my nightstand before deployment. I used to wear it when I rode, until the chain broke. Guess I thought if I wore it long enough, he'd come back. Jack stared at it. The glint of metal reflecting the firelight. He'd want you to keep that. Raven shook her head slowly. No. I think he'd want you to have it. Before Jack could protest, she leaned forward and pressed it into his palm. Not as a burden. As a promise kept. He closed his fist around it, emotion tightening his throat. I don't deserve this. Neither do I, she whispered. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire burned low and the desert cooled. Somewhere, a coyote howled, long and lonely. When Raven finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. Tomorrow, when the truck's fixed, you'll drive Lily to California. You'll get her the life your brother died for. Jack looked at her, surprised. And what about you? She smiled faintly. I'll keep riding. But maybe not away from ghosts anymore. The wind picked up, scattering ashes into the night. Raven lay back on the sand, staring up at the stars, bright, endless, indifferent. Jack watched her for a long moment, then followed her gaze. Two survivors of the same story, bound by one man's sacrifice. And for the first time in years, neither felt entirely alone. The first light of dawn spilled over the desert like liquid gold. Long shadows stretched across the sand, touching the sleeping truck, the dying fire, and the two figures who had kept vigil through the night. Raven stirred first. Her eyes opened slowly, catching the pale blush of morning against the horizon. The fire had burned down to ash, but its warmth still lingered faintly in the ground beneath her. She sat up, brushing dust from her jacket, and glanced toward Jack. He was awake too, leaning against the truck, quiet, thoughtful, as though he hadn't slept at all. Lily was curled in the seat behind him, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. The sight softened something deep inside Raven she didn't know was still capable of softening. Pete emerged from the garage with a yawn, stretching his arms. "Morning, lovebirds," he grumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Truck's ready." New coolant line came in at dawn. Raven shot him a glare. "We're not." Pete chuckled. "Relax, darlin'. I ain't judging. But I am charging double if you two keep looking at each other like that." Jack cracked a faint smile. "Guess I'll pay in stories, not cash." Pete snorted. "You'd have to tell a lot of stories, Marine." He patted the hood of the truck. "She'll run fine now. Just don't push her through Death Valley again unless you hate engines." Jack nodded gratefully. "Appreciate it, Pete, you saved us." Pete shrugged. "You can thank Raven. She called in a favor." Raven pretended not to hear, already strapping her gloves and checking her Harley. "Let's move before the sun gets ugly," she said briskly. Jack nodded, but as he turned toward the truck, Pete caught Raven's arm. "You okay, kid?" Her jaw tightened. "I'm fine. You don't look fine." She hesitated, then sighed. He knew Danny was there when he died. Pete's weathered face softened. "Then maybe fate ain't as random as you think." Raven didn't respond. She just looked toward Jack and Lily, who were loading up, and something inside her shifted again. Something she wasn't ready to name. By the time they hit the highway again, the desert was awake. The sun blazed above them, and the wind tore past like an invisible current. Jack's truck rumbled steadily behind Raven's Harley, both vehicles gliding down the empty stretch that seemed to stretch into forever. Lily sang softly from the window, a tune from some cartoon she loved, and her voice floated out across the wind, pure and bright. It didn't belong in the same world as war scars and broken engines, but maybe that's what made it matter. As they neared a small roadside diner, Raven slowed and signaled for a stop. Jack followed her into the gravel lot. The diner was the kind of place where time forgot to move on. Faded Coca-Cola sign, chipped white paint, the smell of coffee that had been brewing since yesterday. They found a booth by the window. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a name tag that read SUE, brought them pancakes and bacon with a smile that didn't need words. For the first few minutes, they just ate in silence. Lily, delighted by syrup and strawberries, filled the space with soft giggles. Raven watched her with a strange mix of admiration and ache. "She reminds me of him," Raven said finally. "Danny had that same grin. The one that made you think everything would be okay, even when it wasn't." Jack smiled faintly. "Lily got that from her mom. Optimism's her superpower." "Where's her mom now?" Jack hesitated. "Probably remarried. We haven't spoken in years." Raven studied him for a moment. "You ever think about going back? Trying again?" He shook his head. "I don't go backward anymore. Just forward." She smirked faintly. "You sound like a biker." "Guess I'm learning from one." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them changed. Warmer, charged with something unspoken. Raven looked away first, taking a sip of coffee. "You should rest before driving. There's a safe house not far from here. The sirens use it when the roads get rough. You and Lily can stay there till tomorrow." Jack frowned. "You sure that's okay? I'm the one who built it," she said simply. "It's safe." He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. For everything." Raven shrugged. "You're paying your debt just by telling me the truth." But as she said it, she realized that wasn't true anymore. Somewhere between the firelight and dawn, the truth had stopped feeling like a debt, and started feeling like connection. They reached the safe house by late afternoon. A low wooden cabin nestled against red cliffs. The iron siren's emblem was painted faintly on the side, half faded by sandstorms. Inside, it was simple but clean. Maps pinned to the walls, spare helmets hanging from hooks, the faint smell of oil and rain on dust. Lily ran to a shelf of trinkets and old route markers, touching everything with wonder. "Is this your house?" she asked Raven. Raven smiled faintly. "More like a place to stop running." Jack looked around. Feels like it's seen a lot. Yeah, Raven said. A lot of women who lost things, and learned to ride anyway. As dusk crept over the cliffs, they lit the lanterns. The glow turned the wooden walls golden. Lily soon fell asleep on a couch, curled beneath an old siren's jacket that hung past her feet. Raven stood by the window, looking out at the desert. Jack joined her quietly. She's lucky to have you, Raven said. I don't always feel like it, he admitted. Sometimes I think she deserves a dad who isn't still stuck back there. A raven turned toward him. Then get unstuck. That's what Danny would have wanted. He met her gaze, eyes dark and searching. And what about you? What would he want for you? She paused. To stop pretending the road is punishment. They stood in silence for a long time, the air heavy with unspoken understanding. Then Jack said softly, You ever think maybe you stopped at my truck for a reason? Raven's lips curved, a small, almost tender smile. Maybe fate needed a mechanic. He chuckled. You mean for my engine or my soul? Both, she said. But one's easier to fix. The laughter faded into quiet again, and the quiet became something fragile but alive. Outside, the desert night gathered once more, whispering promises neither of them yet understood. Tomorrow, the road would call again. But tonight there was peace. For the first time in years, Raven Steele wasn't riding toward ghosts. She was riding toward something that finally felt like home. Morning came softly, washing the cliffs in pale gold and rose. The desert air was cool, still touched by night, and the horizon shimmered with the promise of heat yet to come. Jack stood outside the cabin, packing the last of their things into the truck. The engine purred now, smooth and steady, a sound that felt like relief. Lily danced nearby, her stuffed bear tucked under one arm, her small boots kicking up dust. Daddy, are we going now? She asked, eyes bright. Yeah, sweetheart, he said, smiling. We're heading home. Raven stepped out of the cabin behind them, her leather jacket draped over one shoulder, her hair still damp from a quick wash. The morning light made her look softer somehow, almost serene. But her eyes carried the same steel that had built the iron sirens. Jack turned toward her. Didn't think bikers got up this early. She smirked. We don't. But sometimes the road doesn't wait. He nodded, closing the truck bed. You sure you don't want breakfast before we go? I'm not the sit-down kind, she said. Then, after a pause, but coffee wouldn't kill me. They shared a quiet laugh, and for a moment, it felt like they'd known each other longer than a single night. Like two souls who'd found each other at the edge of their storms. Inside, the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, just the way Raven liked it. She poured 2 mugs and leaned against the counter while Jack stood across from her. You really meant it, huh? He said. No more running. Raven met his gaze. Yeah. I think I've been chasing ghosts because I didn't want to face what was left behind. He nodded. Danny's memory. Danny, she said quietly. And me. The part of me that died with him. Jack's voice softened. He'd be proud of you, Raven. He really would. Her throat tightened, but she smiled through it. You're good at saying what I didn't know I needed to hear. The corpse teaches you to read people. Or maybe grief does. They fell silent again. The kind of silence that feels full, not empty. The kind that says more than words could. When they stepped outside again, Lily had drawn something in the dust with a stick. A little heart with wings. And inside it, she'd written 3 letters D-R-L. Jack frowned. What's that, baby? Lily grinned proudly. It's for Danny, Raven, and Lily. It's our family picture. Raven froze, her breath catching. For a moment, the child's innocence cracked through years of armor she'd built to survive. Jack crouched beside his daughter. That's beautiful, honey. A raven knelt too, tracing the lines in the dust with her finger. You've got quite an artist there. Yeah. Jack said quietly. She's the reason I still believe there's something good left in this world. Raven looked up at him, and their eyes locked. Longer this time, deeper. No words passed between them, but something did, something raw and real. Finally, she stood and dusted off her hands. You should get moving. California's still a long drive. Jack straightened. You could come with us. You'd like the coast, less dust, more color. Her lips curved into a wistful smile. Tempting. But I've got my own road to finish. He nodded slowly. You sure? Yeah, she said. I think this was where our roads were meant to meet. Not end. Jack exhaled, looking away for a moment before reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out Danny's dog tag, the one she'd given him. Then let me give this back. It belongs with his family. Raven looked at the tag, then at Jack. She shook her head. No. It belongs with the man who lived to remember him. That's what family is too. He hesitated, then closed his hand around it. I'll keep it safe. She smiled. I know you will. They stood there a moment longer, the desert wind sweeping between them, tugging at her braid, carrying the faint scent of motor oil and dawn. Finally, Raven started her bike. The engine roared to life. A sound that had always meant freedom, but now it meant something else too, release. Jack opened the truck door for Lily. Say goodbye, sweetheart. Lily waved eagerly. Bye, Raven. Thank you for saving us. Raven chuckled. You did the saving, kid. You reminded your dad how to smile. Jack leaned on the truck door, his voice steady but warm. If you ever ride through California, look for us. We'll be waiting. Raven gave a small nod. Count on it. The two exchanged one last look. Neither promise nor farewell, just understanding. The kind that doesn't fade when the engines start. Then, with a rev and a spin of dust, Raven Steel pulled onto the road. Her Harley roared like thunder, the wind catching her braid and the sunlight glinting off the silver tag she still wore beneath her shirt. The spare one. Jack watched her ride away, the figure shrinking against the endless horizon until she was just a streak of black and red cutting through gold. Lily tugged his sleeve. Daddy, is she gonna be okay? He smiled softly, eyes still on the road. Yeah, baby. She's finally going home. And somewhere in the distance, Raven smiled too. The road stretched ahead like a promise, the ghost of her brother no longer following but riding beside her. Free at last. For the first time in 8 years, she didn't feel haunted. She felt whole. The iron siren rode on. The desert wind at her back and a new dawn lighting her path. And as the horizon opened